So I have to apologize. I sometimes speak very quickly, and I will then notice that I'm speaking very quickly, and then I'll slow down, and then I'll speed up. So just sorry about that. The first thing I wanted to say before kind of going into all of this, I'm happy to answer questions. If something kind of pops in your head, if something sounds interesting to ask as I'm going, please raise your hand and ask. I don't. It doesn't stop me. It may change my speech a little. I may then be able to focus on something that everybody's more interested in than what I'm talking about, hopefully. Anyway, so when I was thinking about this speech, I was I was noticing that I was telling a lot of stories about, and I was using terms like 22 years ago, and 19 years ago, and 14 years ago. I was just talking to Bertie about, we were talking about the weather, and I relayed to him a speech, or relayed to him to a story when I was working on Baldur's Gate with BioWare, and Ray Musica had come to California to kind of show the product and for us to talk about it. And then in my head I realized, yeah, that was 19 years ago. So I've been doing this a long time, and I think what I wanted to talk about a little bit is that even though I've been doing this a long time, I still want to do this. I still enjoy it. I want to make games until I retire, which is probably going to be in about 25 years. So if the way the American economy is going. Anyway, so that's what I kind of wanted to talk about. And really, what my focus is sort of, these are the things, a lot of things that I've learned. A lot of the things that I've learned about making games, about working with people, and a lot of them are all just built off of, and to be honest, a lot of mistakes that I've made through the years. So the first thing I have, this is just your normal, so this is all the stuff I've worked on. What I like to say is, as a nerd, I've got to work on sort of the trifecta of nerd games. So I've got to check off Star Trek, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and Dungeons and Dragons. So in my career, that's been awesome. And afterward, if anybody has any questions about the games that I've worked on, I'm happy to explain what they were, and if I can come up with some stories about them, I will. This may seem like a really strange slide. So I get asked a lot about my name, and I swear this is the last slide about me personally. So what is my name? So my name is Urquhart, and the best way to look at my name is that it's actually Urquhart Castle is on Loch Ness Monster, in Scotland. So that's actually where I come from. Well, that's where my relatives come from. And so then they immigrated, and now I live in California. I was just being asked in an interview the other day when we were interviewing a senior system designer about why is Obsidian still around. So we've been around for 13 and a half years, and I've been in the industry for 25, and so that's a really long time. So why is that? And I think a lot of it, how we see it and how I've tried to focus my world on, is this idea of constant improvement. These symbols, these Japanese symbols, are for Kaizen. It's sort of it's a Toyota thing, which is about this, basically the process of always getting better. And that's been just something that's been huge about us. And so we've made a lot of mistakes, and there's these key points at Obsidian where I know that we've made really bad mistakes. And so one of them was when we finished Neverwinter Nights 2. So Neverwinter Nights 2 was a Dungeons & Dragons game that came out in 2006 and almost put the company out of business. So we got, it's the classic developer-publisher story. We only got so many milestones, and we only got so much money for our milestones. And then we had to put about $1 million into the product ourselves. And this was a giant mistake. And so what we did after that is we said, okay, we need to communicate better. We need to do budgets better. We need to do all these kind of things better. And more what we learned about was just this idea that every time we start a new project, every time, and I can say this to everybody here, you have to look at everything that you did before and question whether you should still do it. And what we did and what we noticed is we just kept on doing the same things, whether they were the right things to do or not. And the next thing, and this is kind of a more personal thing, I kind of wrote up there, tomorrow is a new day. So I make big mistakes. So when I make a mistake, when a junior designer makes a mistake, a character's wrong, a texture is wrong, there's a bug in the game. When I make a mistake, it could cost $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, and it's hard to wake up the next morning and go, okay, now I gotta go make games again. And games are supposed to be fun. This doesn't seem fun anymore. And so what I do is what I say to myself is, okay, the milk has been spilled, the horses have raced, whatever kind of saying you want to use, and say, today is a new day, and now I'm gonna know what I did, I'm gonna think about what I did wrong, but I'm going to treat it like a new thing, because if I don't, I'll go nuts. I guess that's one of the biggest things that I've learned as I've gone through it is to just, if you put it aside and you say, okay, if I'm still gonna do this, and I wanna make great games, then I have to just, I can't get in my own way. I think one of the big things I had to learn very early on was this idea that, I know this sounds like stupid in some ways, like now versus later, but I think that there's some kind of real corollaries or examples that I can give of sort of things that I've learned that really relate to this. In first, this is gonna sound kind of strange, and I've given this advice a ton of times, but the minute you don't wanna call someone is the minute you have to call them. The minute you don't wanna send an email to someone, well, that's probably a bad example because we all send emails we shouldn't send. But in essence, still, when you don't want to read that email or send that email, you have to. And I think this is something that I've really had to learn in business. I was not someone, I was very shy. I didn't like confrontation. And so I just had to really learn that this is what mattered. Now is what matters. And that applies to so many things in development as well. We've made mistakes as it relates to, you hear me use the word a lot. We made mistakes where we put off making decisions. And I think like one of the decisions that I would say I'm probably the most, the one that hurt us the most was actually our choice of engine on South Park. And so when we did South Park: The Stick of Truth, we did that with Matt and Trey, who make South Park, spend hours and hours with them. And I think one of the things we did is we actually, the whole game is done in scale form. If you know what scale form is, it's a UI, it's a graphic UI middleware. But actually in South Park, the whole game is rendered. So when you see all the characters, Kyle and Cartman, all that kind of stuff, everything is rendered in scale form. Scale form is not made to do that, and it was a nightmare. It made the game look exactly like the show, but as development went on, we knew it was worse and worse, like it was gonna cause us more and more problems, but we didn't make the call. We didn't go, this is gonna hurt us if we don't just, sometimes I don't know, we rip off the Band-Aid. If you take the pain now rather than later. And every time we don't make that decision, we regret it. An example where we did the right thing is we're working on Eternity 2 right now, and sort of starting up sort of the concept of it and all that kind of thing. And what we are learning about is sort of like, we could have just started and gone straight from Eternity 1 to Eternity 2, but we said, no, we want to make the tools better. And then there was the thing, basic people said, well, if we make the tools better, we can't start making the game right now. But we stopped and said, no, we have to make the tools better so we can make the game more efficiently. And so that's what we chose to do. Tools is a great example. I think that, so when we have great tools and when we decide to invest in tools, we do really well. When we don't, we usually lose out. And I think the thing is that with tools, we can be so much more efficient. These are things everybody in here knows, but just to reinforce it. So Fallout New Vegas is a great example of a game where we could start with a great tool set, came from Bethesda, and with about 50 people in about 17 months, we made an 80 to 120 hour game, which is an immense amount of content. It was a little buggy in the end, but it was a great game, and that was an example of tools that were very useful, and they allowed us to make an incredible game. Now I can use this as an example, and this kind of goes into sort of, I call this the Scott Everts paradox. So Scott Everts is a name of someone who no one has ever heard of. And hopefully people will know his name a little bit now. But Scott Everts actually laid out every single level in the first Fallout. So every single tile, every single little thing you see and hear, he did. And so, which was great. I mean, obviously Fallout, great game. I love making it. When we went into Fallout 2, we had a shorter time frame for lots of reasons, and we needed to make a game that was bigger because we wanted to make, we wanted everyone to say, oh, it's even more Fallout, so that's going to make it even better. And so we put a second level designer, area level layout artist or designer on the game, and he started laying out levels. And I just noticed things weren't going very quickly, and so I went to him and I asked, his name was John Diley, and I asked him, what's going on? Like, why can't you get these levels done? I mean, come on, we've done this before. and I'm being mad, like stupidly, but I'm just, I don't know. It's one of those moments where I got mad. And he goes, well, Feargus, the editor doesn't have copy and paste. And I was like, the editor doesn't have copy and paste? So when you make a little room or anything, you can't just select copy and then paste the room over there? He goes, no, there's no copy and paste. So I went over to Scott Everts. This is the Scott Everts paradox. I went over to Scott Everts and said, Scotty, the editor doesn't have copy and paste. He goes, I know. And okay, that would seem to make this a lot slower. He's like, yeah, I didn't want to bother the programmers. And I was like, Scotty, come on. So he goes, well, I just want to bother him. He says, okay, well, let's go ask how long this is going to take. So we go over to Jesse Reynolds, who is the lead programmer in the game. And I go, hey, Jesse, how long is this going to take? And he says, about 3 days. And so I look over at Scotty. So 3 days. How much time would this save you? He's like, I don't want to talk about it. And he left. So what I've learned here is, on top of that, tools are very important. It is very important that you ask questions about tools, about, are these the best tool appliances? And this is what we do now. We just ask a ton of questions about, and we watch people. Because this is, I guess, the paradox that we've found, is that it's oddly, the people who use tools are not always the people that are great about criticizing those tools, or even in the case of Scott Everts, they don't want to bother the programmers. And so you just end up in not a great place. So funnily enough, as I was doing this slide, oddly, I was thinking about this a lot, and about one of the things that I think I've had to learn to do, and that's to really look critically at things. And I know it sounds like yeah, you got to read, you got to look at things and stuff like that. But it actually came from part of the things that came from such a conversation I had with Ed Fries, who I think is here, maybe. Yeah, it's over there. Anyways, which, we were talking very late into one night at DICE, and I'd asked him some questions about, I was kind of frustrated with my studio, and I kind of noticed just things that weren't going as well as I wanted them to go. And kind of what we ended up talking about was this idea of the one thing that I think he felt he was very good at, and something that I think I've tried to get really good at, which is this idea of zeroing in on the problem. And you can only zero in the problem if you really look critically at something. If you really, as Cookie Monster says here, which one doesn't belong? Because I think we all read things. Like we'll get an email, we'll get a contract, we'll get a design document, we'll look at a specification, and it all makes sense. Like you just read and you understand all the words, but did you really read it? And I think many of my mistakes in life is where, in game development, is where I didn't really read it. I didn't really think about it. And this goes even all the way, a very recent example of that was when we went from Eternity 1 into doing the first part of the expansion pack for Pillars of Eternity. And so the team presented their schedule and this, that, and everything, and I was busy and I wasn't thinking, and a good number of people sort of, they said, oh yeah, it makes sense. Well, we've done levels before, we've done creatures, we've done this. But what we weren't taking into account, and no one was really thinking about it, was this idea of, well, we're still going to be supporting Eternity 1 as we're making the expansion pack. And no one was really taking that into account. There was no real schedule for it. There was no really, what are the resources going to be doing? And in the end, so what happened is that our expansion pack took 2 or 3 months longer than we wanted, probably an extra $500,000 more than I wanted. And it was all partly, I'm not saying it's not all on me. I'm not like some magical being that knows everything about game development. But as a group, what we didn't do is we're like, oh, all those words make sense logically, but they're not actually, we didn't really think about them from the standpoint of what they really mean. And I guess this is a part of that, about being critical. Yes? Sure.
Okay, so the DLC was split into 2 parts.
Yes.
Was this the original idea to have it as 2 separate? Because you're talking about mistakes and...
Yes. Yes, so I will go over this mistake. So this is another Feargus mistake. So it came from the best of intentions without really thinking it completely through. So the idea was that we would split the expansion pack into 2 parts because it was a lot of content. So individually, I think the idea is we wanted to make a 20 to 25 hour expansion pack, but that was going to take, the earliest we were going to get it out was probably 6 or 7 months after Eternity came out. And what that meant is, and there's all this, I don't want to say it's sort of like urban myth, but it's sort of all of these things. What everybody says is you want to get DLC or content out as quickly as when you launch your game as possible, and 6 or 7 months just sounded too long. And so I was like, well, let's split it in two. And then the team went, ugh, and yelled at me and started throwing stuff like, that's impossible, and this, that, and the other thing. And ultimately, it wasn't that it wasn't impossible, they were right. In some ways. It added development time because now we had to have all these elements that allowed for 2 parts, and you now had to install 2 things and things like that. And so ultimately it was the wrong decision, partly also because what we learned, at least for Eternity, is that big content like that costs a fair amount, since it was already over your sort of $10 US dollar point, it was probably too expensive already. And so now we wanted people to give us $25 in total, when they could buy some AAA game that was 9 months old for $15 off Steam. And so we had to really think about that stuff differently. And so luckily we learned a lesson, I think, about DLC and expansions as a whole. Like for Pillars in future, we're going to actually do content much differently. And what that is just from a standpoint of, like, it really will be more like the Fallout New Vegas content, which is, it's just smaller DLC. There still needs to be characters and adventure and all that kind of stuff, but it has to be a little bit smaller. So my next thing is ask dumb questions. So this actually, it's both on the development side and sort of development working with the publisher side, and I think also on the publisher side as well. So even though I've been doing this for a long time, I still ask a lot of incredibly stupid questions. Like why is his head that big? Or why is the level that big? Or why does that need to be purple? I mean, and it can be frustrating. The teams that really get frustrating, those are kind of bad examples, but the teams can get really frustrated with me, like, why am I asking these dumb questions? And a lot of it is because I want to sometimes get them out of this sort of the rut. I want them to get out of, they keep on, games are not about a production line. Games are not about just putting a car at the start and out pops a Ferrari at the end. Well, that's maybe, okay, it's nice when a Ferrari pops out the end. But the thing there is this has to be creative. And we have to do it better every time we do this, we have to do it better. And the way that we do that is by thinking about it, and by asking stupid questions, you do that. And it was interesting, a person I learned a lot about saying the stupid thing was actually Trey Parker from South Park. So Trey is an immensely, like, I've done a few things, compared to Trey, it's nothing. Trey is, billions of dollars in Book of Mormon and South Park and that weird puppet movie. And so he's done an amazing, cool things. But when you're working with him and you're in a conference room with him, he's walking around and he just says, okay, here's the stupid idea. And he just says it. And because he says it's the stupid idea, you listen to it. And I think that's a lot of, by asking questions and by forcing people to listen to the stupid thing, it starts a conversation. Now, on the developer side of kind of working with publishers, I'm really annoying. And I think if you ask a lot of publishers, they might say the same. I think I think it's good, bad, a little bit of both. Why I'm annoying is I just flat out ask questions. So when a publisher goes, okay, well, we'll give you $2 million and 3% after we make $5 billion, I go, why? And they go, there's no good answer. Because we should make more than 3% after $5 billion, in my humble opinion as a developer. And so by asking these stupid questions, I ask publishers to explain these things. I ask them to well, what is the marketing cost? What is the PR going to cost? What is this? What? And in the end, usually it comes down to a spreadsheet. Because I ask all these questions, and then I can model all that stuff into a spreadsheet. And then I show it back to him. I go, so this is what you said, and then that creates a very different conversation. Yeah, I know you didn't think you were going to see a picture of Bieber, huh? So ego and pride. It's interesting with ego and pride. What I've learned is that it's sort of a two-edged sword. You need it and you don't need it at the same time. I think that maybe I'm lucky in this in a lot of ways because I started in QA. So I was this annoying QA guy that 2 weeks after he started was telling Brian Fargo all about how to make video games. Yeah, I really was. Yeah, and he was like, "Oh, you're cute," and I think that what's important is that yes, I've been making games for a long time, but that doesn't mean that that person in QA who's been there for 2 weeks sees something that I don't see. Now, when I look out here, I see a fair number of young people, but as you probably know, some of us are getting older. And so generation, it's weird to think this way, but generationally, and I think about this a lot now, generationally, I am not in the same generation as kids who are kids in their early 20s playing games. Now, as someone who doesn't think of themselves as that old, I'm like, whatever. But, I don't love Snapchat. I don't love a lot of those things. But I love technology. So I think knowing that about yourself and me knowing that about myself, it lets me ask good questions, and it helps me listen. Now, the other side of that is that it is important, and I've had to learn this, about that you can be prideful, you can have ego about what you do, because if you do, it shows that you care. It shows that it matters to you. It shows that you're not just this servant doing something. And you find that a lot of times, there is a certain amount of when I talk about sort of the publishers and developers, because my life has all been, I was first worked in publishing, and now I've been a developer for 13 and a half years, or independent developer for 13 and a half years. And it's been an interesting road to kind of learn how to maneuver all of that, how to present your ideas as things that need to be made, but also working with someone who ultimately decides if they're going to be there or not. And that's this constant going back and forth with this ego and pride. So it's constantly sometimes being Justin Bieber and sometimes not. It is about, saying this idea deserves to live in my game, and then at the same time listening to what the publisher wants and putting that ego and that pride aside. So I was talking about spreadsheets. I believe math is good. And I know that sounds like, obviously math is good, but I find a lot, and this is an interesting thing when I am doing things on the business side, or even in the development side sometimes, I'm a big believer in Excel. I use Excel practically for everything. If I could manage my children through Excel, I absolutely would. My son would I don't know, he would figure something out. I'm sure there's something up on YouTube that would tell my son how to get away from that. And I kind of put in here pivot tables, sum ifs, and data are my friend. And I really do. So what I try to do is understand the data about our games. I understand how are the tasks working, how are the bugs working, what are people saying, and I try to put everything into a way for me to understand, and for people at the company to understand. This is probably hard. I'll get out of the way. So, wow, huh? Interesting. So this is just an example of I try to visualize. So really when it comes to data, I try to visualize things to quickly understand. And I think that's the important thing about data is how can you do it so you can quickly understand the problem. So just quickly how this is, I won't go into all the details. These are developers, yes. And then the different colors are features, so these features. And then these things are basically the different, the vertical lines are when we're trying to ship things. And red is the stuff that's supposed to be done by the red line. See how well we're doing? And the yellow line is the stuff we're trying to do with yellow and orange. So you're in some ways though, what this helped our producers a lot from the standpoint of, we have 10 producers on this game, and they are often scheduling people simultaneously. And they can go to this and look, well, Tim Hume, because he doesn't do any work obviously, is way over the red line, we have to fix that. So very simple, and I try to look at data this way. I try to visualize, because this team has about 100 developers on it. It has about 130 people, but 100 people that are actively developing. How do we see that and not get lost? And so that's why, in this case, if you're curious, this actually is Jira. We use Jira for everything, and then this is a plug-in to Jira called EasyBI, and it just lets us create charts and things like this very quickly. Sort of weirdly like sort of a business intelligent pivot table system that within Excel. As a part of all that, as we're trying to solve problems and we're trying to look at things, what I've had to learn a lot is sort of a lot of the things in games are hard to figure out. Like there's so much stuff going on. There's the save load is broken and the rendering's not working and we're trying to get this level done and we're trying to get that level done and we're trying to get a demo done and E3 is coming up. There's a billion things coming at us all at once. And what I've learned, and sometimes you get into these conference rooms and you're talking and there's 10 people and they're screaming at each other. It's because the problem is not solvable as one problem. And I think in a lot of ways, like what I've tried to learn is that when that happens, we bucket it up. We basically just say, what is in this bucket? Like, okay, so the rendering, okay, that's bucket 1. What's this bucket? Bucket 2. And then we solve the buckets, and by solving the things independently, we get to a good place. And otherwise, because otherwise you can never solve like the super complicated thing that is all together. It's very hard to do it. And so what I've tried to do is just say, okay, let's solve one thing, next thing, and the other. Interestingly, this is actually how we make our role-playing games too. So role-playing games also are giant, huge, crazy, variable equations from the standpoint of a player could do A, they could do B, they could do C. B could go to D, D goes to Z, G goes to 8, so they're crazy. How we actually do it, if I pull back all the things that we do, what we generally do is we'll say, okay, you have like area 1, or a group of areas. We have another group of areas. And what we do is we say, okay, this part of the story exists here. And the player has all these choices, like an immense number of choices. And then this is the second, let's say Act 2, an immense number of choices. But the pieces of information that go back and forth between Act 1 and Act 2, very small. And by doing that, players feel that they have an immense number of choice. We track a certain amount of the choice, so it affects things here, but it is not that every single choice goes into here. And we often call that, sometimes horrible way of saying it, I say we sort of create terrorist cells of our game, and that's generally, so we bucket it up so that one bucket cannot affect the other bucket. So it's something you've heard a billion times, I'm sure. It's this idea that you need to win the war, not the battle. This is something I had to learn a lot, which is, as I didn't like doing confrontation at Interplay was a company based on confrontation. It was you got what you wanted by fighting for it, and so everything was a fight. And I had to learn that when I went into a meeting or I went into a conference room to talk about things, that I didn't need to win. And even if I did win, I may lose. There's this thing, I fought so much and I fought so hard so many times that people didn't want to work with me anymore. They were mad at me all the time. They felt all I cared about was Black Owl Studios. All I cared about was Fallout. Now, in part that was true because we were successful and we were making money and the rest of Interplay was not making money. And so there was a certain amount of that was true. But it's not just about me winning those fights. It was about me working with all the other executives because, yes, I could make a great game, but it required people needed to go market and sell it and PR it and test it and make audio for it and all the billions of things. So this is what I had to do. So I was like this in meeting. I was a little kid who just wanted to say no. And because what would happen is, and I have to, my wife now, not at the time, she's the one that was in a meeting and eventually came to me afterward to kind of give me this analogy, or this kind of a lesson that she had to learn. And what she had to learn was that she could be in a room and 10 people have ideas. And then someone would say, her name's Margot. Margot, what do you think? And she would use more words than this, but she said, that's stupid. And ultimately she was just saying no. And her boss had to take her aside and said, look, you don't need to just say no. What you can say is, basically I want to think about it. I'm going to think about it, and then I'm going to get back to you. And by doing that, you basically pull back, you leave the meeting, and then you can go think about it. You maybe come up with, if you've listened to what people want, or she listened to people want, then she can come up with an idea of, okay, well, I can't do that stupid thing, but I can do something different instead. And so she could come back to the meeting, and she could say, this is what we can do instead. Or she can just say no, but now it's been thought of. Now it shows that she's thought about it, and that it matters, and that she's a part of the team. So this is kind of an embarrassing thing, but and it seems again like an obvious thing, but sometimes in business it's easy to lie, and I think that I have a moment in time for me where an employee needed a loan. I don't remember exactly why, but he needed a loan, and I needed to go check into it. And about a week later, he came and he said, "Hey, did you go check into it?" And I said to him, just off the cuff, I said, "Yeah, of course. It's moving forward." Now I lied to him. I don't know why I lied to him. I could just said I didn't have time, but I lied to him. And I think he kind of knew that I lied to him, because then it was really hard for me to go get the loan for him. And then I had to go back to him and say it was going to take a long time, and I had to fess up that I had never looked into it. It wasn't really worth the lie, and to this day, that person knows that I lied to them. And I take this across all kinds of business. In business, it seems to be easy to do that lie. It is easy to, yeah, I called you, I sent that email, no, we talked about 2% rather than 6%, no this, no that. And actually, my lawyer actually said to me at one point, he said, "Look, if you did something, just say what you did." He said, in the end, it's very hard to not get in trouble for things that you did actually do. And if you're just very truthful about everything, it just makes everything simpler. And for me, what that means is, because I try to practice this as much as I can, I sleep well at night. I don't worry about my relationships with people, because what I've said is what I do, or I do what I said. And this is the last thing, or one of the last two things, is really, when it comes to games, what I always try to remember is ultimately there's a kid who's going to pay, sorry, I'm going to do it in US dollars, is going to pay $60 potentially for a game. For a kid who's 8, 9, or 10, that's a whole lot of money. And so I'm responsible to him. All the other crap about, like, well, it was really hard and we didn't have enough testers, and they wouldn't give me the budget that we wanted, and the designers wouldn't listen, and the artists were being lame, and the programmers were being programmers. It doesn't matter in the end, because that's the person who matters. He's the person that we make games for. Well, we make them for ourselves too, but he's the person we make games for, and we have a responsibility to him to do our best that we can do. And again, it doesn't matter how hard it was or what the roadblocks were in the way. All he cares is he just gave us $60, and that's something I always try to remember. So my last thing, because I was thinking a lot about like what I've learned and where I've gone in games. There's been times where it's not been fun, and that's a big surprise, right? It's not been fun. It's been hard. It's been incredibly frustrating. I've wanted to walk away from my company 2, 3, 4 times. I mean, literally, I was getting in my car, telling my wife, I'm going to drive in and resign, just because it was really hard. But I still do it because I love games, but I have to remind myself that I love games. And so kind of my last piece of advice, or my one last thing that I think about, is this idea that we all need to be this guy, right? We have to play it. We have to play it. We have to love it. And for me, I forget that sometimes. What I will do is I will not play a game for 6 weeks. And then I'll go, how the heck did I not play a game for 6 weeks? And then I make myself, it sounds ridiculous, make myself play a game. But I think for all of us that make games a lot and are so busy, and as we get older, we have kids and we have companies and we have parents and we have all this stuff that we're taking care of, we stop playing. And I think at the end, if we're going to love it and we're going to stay in this for 25 years and then 25 more, we got to keep playing and we got to keep loving it. Thank you.
Okay. I understand that you like the speech, so now the time for you to ask questions. By the way, Feargus, there's a chance to play a game in our indie showcase. 11-Bit Studios, Polish company, is funding the prizes. We try to make it more and more interesting every year, and the question is now.
Okay, so speaking of the little guy that's going to spend $60 on the game, and this magical thing called ESRB or PEGI
Okay.
in Europe.
Right.
And to you as a father.
Uh-huh.
So, do you use those suggestions personally when buying games for your son?
Oh, do I use suggestions from the ESRB or PEGI as to what we should have in our game or not have in our game?
Do you think they are worth it, right?
Oh.
Because this system exists, and you have to get this certified in some places, and it will dictate, especially in the US, if you have a adult only rating.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
which basically prevents from sale. Most stores don't stock these things, right?
Right.
So
what do I think? So I think that those things are necessary. So I have children, and there's things that I don't think they need to see. And of course, culturally, what we do in America and what we do in Poland and in Germany and Russia and China is all very different. But I think that there's things, this sounds stupid. I would love to be able to turn swearing off in Call of Duty. My son loves Call of Duty, but there's swearing, right? And literally, if I could just turn swearing off, it's fine. So as a father, I'd like to see that there's things where we can do things. On the flip side, I'm a bad person to ask, particularly with children, because I'm a little biased as to I'm okay with what my kids play to an extent as long as I've talked to them about it. What I don't like about when it comes to the ESRB and PEGI necessarily is that like it really should be up to parents and to what they're having their kids see. And I don't. Sometimes it just frustrates me a little bit of why games are looked at so critically when the kids are watching some show on HBO, which is Game of Thrones, right? I mean, they could just turn the TV on and no one's yelling at George R.R. Martin, right? So, but kids buy the South Park product and I'm the devil, right? Maybe I should be the devil for the South Park product, but yeah.
Okay, the questions here.
First of all, thank you. It was truly inspiring speech.
Thank you.
So with all the experience that you have now, I wonder what's the biggest challenge for you in your daily work?
My daily work. My biggest challenge, what's hard now is Obsidian is about 220 people. And so we've sort of changed from a studio of making one game to a studio making multiple games, including Armored Warfare, which, like I said, has 100 developers and 120, 130 people if you include producers and testers and things like that. So what's my job is the better question. Like, my job is I'm not a designer anymore. I was never a programmer. So what is my job? I need to be managing the managers of the managers who manage in some way, right? And so now, oddly, that chart that I had showed up here, that's one of my techniques. So how can I set up systems by which I can see things in a constructive way? And that's really my daily challenge. My daily challenge is, am I spending my time right? Am I reading the right design documents? Am I looking at the schedules? Am I critically looking at that goes back to, not to repeat my speech, but am I critically looking at things? And I think that's my big challenge, is my time. It's really time at this point. I have so little of it day to day. And like another example of, like, I had to make a decision a while back of, like, early on I could take everybody at the studio out for lunch like once a year, right? I mean, not individually, so I could just take them all out easily. So now it got to a point where, okay, so if there's 220 people, there's 240 business days. Okay, if I use every lunch and I don't go on vacation, I can take everybody out to lunch once a year. So that's not going to happen, right? So in the end, what I said, okay, so my managers, so I then went to my managers. Now I make sure that my next level down managers, I'm taking them out to lunch. And I try to do that every 3 or 4 months, rotate through everybody. And so I guess that's my challenge. My challenge is figuring out how to run a studio differently where I can't go all the way into the weeds anymore.
I have a question connected to that.
Sure.
In Krakow Technology Park, we have this incubator where we have more and more games companies, and I see that people who love creating games or programming, for example, start to having their own small team, and they stop doing what they love. Mm-hmm. And they have problems with keeping the motivation high because they've loved doing games, and right now they are leading the company, not the
Yes.
So how do you keep motivated? Like, you say that you love creating games, but you are quite far off this.
I'm very far away.
Of the process, yeah.
Well, part of it is I play our games, and that's what I'm doing better today than I was doing a year ago. This sounds bad, but for a long time, there's certain games that we've shipped that I've not finished, which is very embarrassing, but it's just been impossible. And so I am trying to change my job so that never happens again, is a good example. And I think the other thing is, you're absolutely right. What happens to a lot of studios is that the people, as they get bigger, the people who were making things now have to manage, and there's some people who like managing, and there's some people who don't like to manage. I made a choice to manage. That was a weird crossroads. I mean, maybe I should have gone the other way. I don't know. But I think there's a lot of systems, and depends upon how big a developer is. So Blizzard is a good example from the standpoint of, Frank, who is the lead technical programmer on World of Warcraft. So he's the lead technical programmer. He doesn't manage anyone really. He has a person who does all the management stuff for him. And I think that's ultimately what I think a lot of us, as games get bigger and studios get larger, is their managers have to be something that's specifically done by some people, and then the technical person, or the creative person, the developer. I believe a developer, particularly a senior one, can always manage 2 or 3 people, but as soon as it gets above that, then it's just, they're not spending the time on what they actually love.
Okay, so we have questions.
You talked about spreadsheets and design documents before, and you clearly love spreadsheets. So what's your advice for people like me who have problems with keeping the design document up to date? What's your approach, and what's your tips for people?
For doing that?
Yeah, for doing that.
How to fall in love.
Let's see. So that's a tough one. I'll tell you how we do it. So we've moved over to Confluence, and so Confluence, if you don't know what it is sort of it's a wiki, but it's a wiki that's a little bit more structured, and it has lots of macros. And if you haven't checked out Confluence for writing stuff up, it's super cool, and it just has all these cool things you can do with it. And we actually now have sort of created this system in which in Confluence, you can add tasks to a page. They're not like Jira tasks, they're just like checked off, but they are actually assigned to the person. And then we have a dashboard of to show what people have actually reviewed. So what that does is, at least for documents that are going through the review process, the producer has his dashboard of has everybody reviewed something? And then he does what any manager does. He walks around and he looks at someone, did you review the thing? And they look at him and he already knows the answer, right? And then they're like, no, and they're like, can you review it? And so, and I think that's I guess it's a good thing, and I should maybe have added this to this. I think one of the important things that we've learned a lot recently is really this idea of there's so many problems in development, and when you're making a big game, that reviewing is incredibly important. And when you're trying to get that milestone done, you're trying to get to a show, you're trying to whatever, you forget to review, you just stop. And that's what we've done on our teams, and we have a game in production right now that's been hurt immensely because we just were trying to get our milestones done, we weren't reviewing it. And why does that tie into design documents? Well, if you're kind of forcing or you're making review being important, then the design documents follow, because people are looking at them and they're getting done. Now, there's a second side of that, because design documents then over time just to start to, I don't know what that word is, but they just get worse. This sounds weird, but someone just needs to be the person who's going through, in this case, so it was like, I'll do it on sometimes when I'm really interested in a certain project, but we make it the producer's job. At some point, they have to go up on Confluence, and they just have to read things, and they have to go, this is out of date, fix it, this, and it has to be an actual task.
Okay. The space for last question from the crowd. Yeah, I was looking. Okay, second question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's me again.
No worries.
You mentioned how important it is to improve constantly.
Yes.
Do you follow some kind of a daily routine that helps you do it? Like, how do you improve constantly?
You know, I wish I could say that I have a daily routine. I think it's either something that I've just trained myself. So I'm the kind of person, I want my company to succeed. It's duh, like we all do, but I mean, I wake up at the middle of the night, which is good and bad. It's good because it makes me think about these things. It's bad because I'm not getting enough sleep. But I think the thing is just this, I want to do this. I want to make games. I love games. I want to keep on doing it. And so it's just this constant desire to solve problems. I guess that's what it is. What I was supposed to be in this life, other than a game developer, is I was supposed to be an engineer. And I don't really tell the story as much anymore, but I decided to go into games rather than finish the last 3 classes in college. My dad was not very pleased with that. But I guess the thing is that background of problem solving. And so I guess maybe that's what it is I'm always looking at, can we do it better? I don't know. So I don't have a process. It's not like I wake up in the morning, or I have it every Thursday at 4 p.m. I say, all right, make stuff better. It matters to me. And I guess that goes back to the critically looking at things. Is this really good? Could we do this? Constantly asking that question. Because as an independent developer, that's what you got to do. And we look at that a lot all the time, because I can put 70 people on a game. I know that sounds like a lot, but I can put 70 people on a game. A publisher can put 350 people on a game. It's really hard to be an independent developer and put 350 people. It's scary. And so in the end, it's I guess because it's a requirement. If I don't do it, I worry we'll be out of business. And then maybe that's my incentive.
Okay, the last question is always here from stage about your advice to young developers, young companies. People are saying about multiple opportunities, VR, mobile, whatever, different genres. What is your advice for young people who are starting this career in gaming business?
What would be my advice? My advice is make something you believe in. So I think sometimes when we're making games, we make things that we think someone else wants. And that's a part of it. It has to be. There's, particularly if you're Activision making Call of Duty, you have to take the market into account and things like that. But I think when you're first starting out, if you're not making something you love, that you get and you really understand, then I don't think it can be as great as to show how amazing of a game that you can make.
Thank you for that. This is all the time we've got for this talk, but of course you can try to hunt down Feargus during the conference. Once again, I invite all of you and Feargus to our expo hall, where we have more than 100 exhibitors. 67 of them are indie independent developer studios. But please join me giving thanks to this inspiring talk we've had from Feargus Urquhart.
Thank you. Thank you very much.